Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about community-led housing, co-housing, custom build as part of the means of housing innovation in the corridor. I've taken very seriously the idea of delivering 1 million homes by 2050. That's about 8 Milton Keyneses plus 2 Oxfords and 2 Cambridges, or 1 Milton Keynes every 3 years. So, you might mistake it for a number that's been plucked out of thin air to sound good, but we're gonna take it seriously for today. So Town, my company, and my co-founder Johnny Anstead is also here today. We set up in 2014 because we wanted basically to build projects that kind of embodied our values, so sustainable and really kind of designed more around the needs of people, needs that they perceive very clearly themselves, and needs that are partly about understanding what makes good places. We're going to talk mainly about community-led housing, and basically I include in that projects led by neighbourhood planning groups, so might not be housing led by the people living in it, but is community-led, land trust, housing co-ops, co-housing communities, and custom building, and they have common themes, which is co-design and deep collaboration, community-based stewardship of land or assets, and tangible, meaningful community benefits. We've got a couple of projects I'm going to mention today. I'm not really going to talk about this one because it's still at planning stage, but this is a site called the Agora in Wolverton. Wolverton is one of the original railway towns, Victorian towns that Milton Keynes was grafted onto. So with our partners, we have acquired this rather grim late 1970s shopping centre that the community have been trying to get shot of for about 3 decades, or about 3 years after it opened, and we're hoping to replace it. This is hot off the architect's computers today, with a piece of fine-grained mixed-use walkable urbanism. We're also trying to deliver it with 1 car parking space per dwelling, which is probably one of the key challenges in Milton Keynes, where, as we talked about earlier, that shouldn't be a challenge in a Victorian part of town, but it is a challenge as a whole. And the project we are going to talk a bit more about today is Marmalade Lane, which was finished at the end of 2018 and is now inhabited, and is a 42-unit collective custom build co-housing development for Cambridge Co-housing Limited, which was a pre-existing group. So rather than talk about the project, as a set piece, I'm going to try to use it just to kind of illustrate a few observations. So the first thing is, why diversify? Why have community-led and custom-built housing? That's a pretty famous chart now that basically shows that the private house building market will never, it's not just not meeting demand is not a bug of the system, it's a feature of the system. And as we see, going back over the years, it's only when the state really has intervened that we got the numbers we needed. And people don't like it either. And there was a quote from Nick Rogers, which may be apocryphal, but I don't think it is, at the bottom for those of you who are quick. The second reason is that when you work with the people who are going to live in places, or who already live in them, when you're working in an existing context, you get better urbanism through informed engagement with people. That's Marmalade Lane, where we've got car-free street going through the middle in an area where the local planning authority typically requires 2.4 car parking spaces per dwelling. And on the right, and I'm showing the limits of the format here, we had community engagement for Wolverton. And here, this is, so the second key point is that when people have co-designed the place that they're going to live in, they tend to stay put. They're invested in the place, and they get busy in the parish councils and the WI and all the other things that we're now seeing people in Cambridge getting involved in. And we had kids on site and people coming to see things all through the build process. And then I guess the key point is, in the end, you get better social and environmental outcomes. We have a lovely big garden, it's now green, where the car parking would ordinarily be in the single urban block that is Marmalade Lane, and the common facilities provide a place for people to come together and be neighbourly and look out for each other and look after each other's kids, and generally feel like a community. And then how? Well, this is a guy called Dave Prinsep. He's the head of property at Cambridge City Council, and he basically enabled Marmalade Lane to happen by deciding that instead of just simply flogging a piece of land on the open market, the council would accept maybe 90 to 95% of its actual market value and enable a community-led co-housing project. And here he is talking about their experience, which many other local authorities could and should copy. The other element of how is a new approach to typology. So what we did at Marmalade Lane was we had a load of residents with different needs, and we basically designed 4 shell house types that worked as pieces of a street and pieces of an urban block, and people could customize them from floor by floor and use the attic or not to give everything from a 50 square meter 1-bed house to a 128 square meter 5-bed house. The other element is tuning it into modern methods of construction. I know that Mark's going to talk about it later, but we built Marmalade Lane out of 2 systems, a cross-laminated timber frame building for apartments, and then closed timber panel systems supplied by our partner Trevselhus, who are also the main funder of the project, Swedish system, and it's built to kind of close to passive house standard. So challenges, well, Johnny's fond of saying that there are 5 issues with community-led housing and all of them are land. I've come up with a few different ones here. So it is land, there's not enough of it and it's in the wrong hands to get this kind of stuff going. Development finance, we have to move to a more non-speculative model. It's pretty hard for SME developers like us to get into the market. User finance is still an issue, and whatever the last point was. But the opportunities, more housing, very little competition between this and the stuff we already do, and better. We need to create exemplars, and we can create exemplars and pioneers for these new and expanded settlements with 1 million homes by 2050. And finally, this is a real opportunity, I think, to show what one of the benefits of having a garden city land value capture type model would be in terms of getting land into different hands. So my last slide is just this rather lovely quote from a review of Marmalade Lane, which basically says, before co-housing was invented, there was a term for residential developments that incorporated good design, close communities, communal gatherings, shared gardens, etc. And it was just simply called housing, and that's all we're trying to do. Thank you.